Hello everyone. After a short gap, I am restarting my biology 11 and 12 reading session again. So today we are starting class 11, unit 5, Human Physiology, chapter number 14, breathing and exchange of gases. So in this session, I will be reading the chapter exactly as it is written in the NCERT textbook, line by line and word by word. Okay, so there will be no explanation, only clear and steady reading. You can listen to this while traveling, resting, or doing your daily work and revise biology passively. Okay, so open your book if you have it with you. Otherwise, you can simply sit relax and listen it carefully. So let's begin. Unit 5, Human Physiology, Chapter 14, Breathing and Exchange of Gases. As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acid, fatty acid, etc. to drive energy to perform various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above metabolic reaction. It is therefore evident that oxygen has to be continuously provided to the cell and carbon dioxide produced by the cell have to be released out. This process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Place your hand on your chest. You can feel the chest moving up and down. You know that is due to breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing are described in the following section of this chapter. Respiratory organ. Mechanism of breathing vary among different group of animals depending mainly on their habitats and level of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelacanths, flatworm, etc. exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle and insects have a network of tubes, that is, tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. Special vascularized structure called gills, branchial respiration are used by most of the aquatic arthropod and mollusca, whereas vascularized bags called lungs, that is, pulmonary respiration, are used by the terrestrial form of the exchange of gases. Among vertebrate, fishes use gills, whereas amphibian, reptile, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frog can respire through their moist skin, cutaneous respiration also. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils opening out above the upper lip. It leads to the nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber open into the pharynx, a portion of which is the common passage for food and air. The pharynx open through the larynx region into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which help in sound production and hence called the sound box. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of the food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into a right and left primary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes repeated division to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles ending up in the very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, and the tertiary bronchi and initial terminal bronchioles gave rise to the number of very thin, irregular walled and vascularized bag-like structure called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli comprise the lung. We have two lungs which are covered by a double layer pleura with pleural fluid between them. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. The part starting with the external nostril up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and their ducts from the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system. The conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clear it from foreign particles, humidifies, and also bring the air to body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by the dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such that any change in the volume of the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lungs, pulmonary cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves the following steps. Step 1. Breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. Step 2. Diffusion of gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide across alveolar membrane. Step 3, transport of gases by the blood. Step 4, diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. Step 5, utilization of oxygen by the cell of catabolic reaction and resultant release of carbon dioxide, that is cellular respiration, as dealt in the chapter 2. Mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs, intrapulmonary pressures, are less than the atmospheric pressure, that is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and the specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostal between the ribs, help in generation of such gradient. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increase the volume of thoracic chamber in the anterior and posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscle lift off the rib and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in the pulmonary volume. An increase in pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move inside the lungs, that is inspiration. Relax of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, returning the diaphragm and sternum to their normal position, and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. This led to an increase in intrapulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration. We have the ability to increase the strength of the inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscle in the abdomen. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. The volume of air involved in breathing movement can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Respiratory volume and capacities. Tidal volume, TV. Volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration, it is approx 500 milliliter. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 milliliter of air per minute. Inspiration reserve volume, IRV. A person can inspire by a forcible inspiration. This average 2,500 milliliter to 3,000 milliliter. Expiration reserve volume, ERV. A person can expire by a forcible expiration. This averages 1000 milliliter to 1100 milliliter. Residual volume, RV. A volume of air remain in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages 1100 milliliter to 1200 milliliter. By adding up a few respiration volumes described above, one can derive various pulmonary capacities which can be used in clinical diagnosis. Inspiration capacity, IC. Total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiration reserve volume, that is tidal volume plus inspiration reserve volume, that is CV plus IRV. Now, expiratory capacity, EC. Total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiratory. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume, that is CV plus ERV. Functional residual capacity, volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. This includes ERV plus RV. Vital capacity, VC. The maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration. This includes ERV, TV and IRV, or the maximum volume of air a person can breathe out after a forced inspiration. Total lungs capacity, TLC. Total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of forced inspiration. This includes RV, ERV, TV and IRV, or vital capacity plus residual volume. Exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary site of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on pressure concentration gradient. Solubility of the gas as well as the thickness of the membrane involved in diffusion are also some important factor that can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented by PO2, means partial pressure of oxygen, for oxygen, and PCO2 for carbon dioxide, that is partial pressure for carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of these two gases in the atmospheric air and the two sides of diffusions are given in table 14.1, and in figure 14.3 the data given in the table clearly indicates a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissue. So similarly, a gradient is present for carbon dioxide is in the opposite direction, that is from tissue to blood and blood to alveoli. As the solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than that of oxygen, the amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of oxygen. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, namely the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, the endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and the basement substance, composed of the thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium at the basement membrane surrounding by the single layer endothelial cell of capillaries. In between them, however, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Therefore, all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissue and that of carbon dioxide from tissue to alveoli. Transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. About 97% of oxygen is transported by red blood cells, RBCs, in the blood. The remaining 3% of oxygen is carried in a dissolved state through the plasma. Nearly 20 to 25% of carbon dioxide is transported by RBCs, whereas 70% of it is carried by bicarbonate. About 7% of carbon dioxide is carried in a dissolved state through plasma. Transport of oxygen. Hemoglobin is a red color iron containing pigment present in the RBCs. Oxygen can bind with hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of oxygen. Binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration, and temperature are the other factor which can interfere with this binding. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the partial pressure of oxygen. This curve is called the oxygen dissociation curve and is highly useful in study the effect of factors like partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen concentration, etc. on binding of oxygen with hemoglobin. In the alveoli, where there is high partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, lesser hydrogen concentration, and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable from the formation of hemoglobin. Whereas in the tissues where low partial pressure of oxygen, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, high H plus concentration, and higher temperature exist, the conditions are favorable and for dissociation of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin. This clearly indicates that oxygen gets bound to hemoglobin in the lungs surface and get dissociated at the tissues. Every 100 milliliter of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 milliliter of oxygen to the tissue under normal physiological condition. Transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is carried by hemoglobin as carb-amino-hemoglobin, about 20 to 25%. This binding is related to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and partial pressure of oxygen is a major factor which could affect this binding. When partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high and partial pressure of oxygen is low, as in the tissue, more binding of carbon dioxide occurs. Whereas when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and partial pressure of oxygen is high, as in the alveoli, dissociation of carbon dioxide form from carb-amino-hemoglobin take place. That is, carbon dioxide which is bound to hemoglobin from the tissue is delivered at the alveoli. RBCs contains a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantity of the same is present in the plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the following reaction in both directions. Those are carbon dioxide plus water. In the presence of carbonic anhydrase, it will form H2CO3, that is carbonic acid, and in the presence of carbonic acid and carbonic anhydrase, it will form bicarbonate plus hydrogen. At the tissue site, where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high due to catabolism, carbon dioxide diffuses into blood, RBCs, and plasma and form bicarbonate and hydrogen. At the alveolar site, where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low, the reaction process in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of carbon dioxide and water. Thus, carbon dioxide trapped as bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as carbon dioxide. Every 100 milliliter of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 milliliter of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Regulation of respiration. Human beings have a significant ability to maintain the respiratory rhythm to suit the demands of the body tissues. This is done by the natural system. A specialized central present in the medulla region of the brain called respiratory rhythm center is primarily responsible for the regulation. Another center present in the pons region of the brain called pneumotaxic center can moderate the function of the respiratory rhythm center. Neural signal from this central can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions. Increase in these substances can activate this center, which in turn can signal the rhythm center to make necessary adjustment in the respiratory process by which these substances can be eliminated. Receptor associated with aortic arch and carotid artery also can recognize changes in carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration and send necessary signal to the rhythm center for remedial action. The role of oxygen in the regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. The disorders of respiratory system. Asthma. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema is a colonic disorder in which alveolar wall are damaged due to which respiratory surfaces decrease. One of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking. Occupational respiratory disorder. In certain industry, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to inflammation, leading to fibrosis, that is proliferation of fibrous tissue, and thus causing serious lungs damage. Workers in such industry should wear protective mask. Summary. Cells utilize oxygen for metabolism and produce energy along with substances like carbon dioxide, which is harmful. Animals have evolved different mechanisms for the transport of oxygen to the cell and for removal of carbon dioxide from there. We have a well-developed respiratory system comprising two lungs and associated air passage to perform this function. The first step in respiration is breathing, by which atmospheric air is taken in, inspiration, and the alveolar air is released out, that is expiration. Exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between deoxygenated blood and alveoli, transport of these gases throughout the body by blood, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the oxygenated blood and tissues, and utilization of oxygen by the cells, that is cellular respiration, are the other step involved. Inspiration and expiration are carried out by creating pressure gradient between the atmospheric and the alveoli with the help of specialized muscles, intercostal and diaphragm. Volumes of air involved in these activities can be estimated with the help of spirometer and are of clinical significance. Exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide at the alveoli and tissue occur by diffusion. Rate of diffusion is dependent on the partial pressure gradient of oxygen and carbon dioxide, their solubility as well as the thickness of the diffusion surface. This factor is in our body facilitate diffusion of oxygen from the alveoli to the deoxygenated blood as well as from the oxygenated blood to the tissue. The factors are favorable for the diffusion of carbon dioxide in the opposite direction, that is, from tissue to alveoli. Oxygen is transported mainly as oxyhemoglobin in the alveoli, where partial pressure of oxygen is higher and oxygen get bound to hemoglobin, which is easily dissociated at the tissue, where partial pressure of oxygen is low and partial pressure of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration are high. Nearly 70% of carbon dioxide is transported as bicarbonate with the help of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is carried by hemoglobin as carb aminohemoglobin in the tissue, where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high, it gets bound to blood, whereas in the alveoli, where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and partial pressure of oxygen is high, it gets removed from the blood. Respiratory rhythm is maintained by the respiratory center of the medulla region of brain, pneumotaxic center in the pons region of the brain, and a chemosensitive area in the medulla can alter respiratory mechanism.